Hello and welcome to World Awake TV. I'm your host Sky Covey, and I'm here on the big island of Hawaii on the Kona side with Dr. Michael Salla, my special guest, who is also a Big Island resident and probably one of the most well-researched people in this ufology, exopolitics, and disclosure movement happening today. So Dr. Salla is not afraid to tackle and dive deep into some of the big topics that are just now being disclosed. Topics about Antarctica and Mars and Atlantis, as well as the secret space program, and some things that really hit home, like the fracking and the correlations you've been able to find between the geothermal fracking and the earthquakes. Just 1 year ago, we were having rivers of lava flowing past and destroying so many of our friends' homes. So I'm really excited to find out where this conversation is going to lead us. I'm sure it will be illuminating. Aloha, Dr. Salla, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sky. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. You know, this has been a few weeks now since the cosmic waves that I just saw you at that event with Goode, and you've been in a flurry of work finishing up your book these last few weeks?
Well, that's right. Yeah, just been working on this latest book on the US Air Force secret space program since September of last year, and it's just now we finally have the proof copies, and it's going to be officially released on May 21st. So that's only just over a week away, and very much looking forward to this book.
And we actually have a copy of it here, fresh off the press. Take a look at that, you guys. You're one of the first people to ever see this. This is very exciting, and I do look forward to getting into this. So, you know, before we talk about that, I want to ask you, you know, in the research you do, I want you to share a little bit maybe about some of the methodologies you use and, you know, some of the inspiration behind why you do what you do and why you go so deep with your work.
Sure. Well, really it began for me in 1989, which is when I first began doing my PhD. It was on international conflict resolution.
Right.
And I was very interested in the philosophies of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King in terms of how these applied to international conflict. So I was very interested in finding out how to resolve international conflict using non-violent methodologies.
And you actually held a conference about that, yes?
Several conferences, yes. And I did field work. So I did field work in East Timor, I did field work in Kosovo, also in Sri Lanka. And so I went to these places to really look at how the different groups were involved in this conflict and how there was an attempt to kind of non-violently resolve those. So I was very much a peace and conflict resolution scholar. And in my journey along the path of understanding international conflict, I came across this information about a cover-up of advanced technologies and extraterrestrial life. And the more I studied it, the clearer it became that international conflict was actually a cover for how they are able to do a lot of the secret funding for these projects, and how they're able to conduct these projects secretly without the world knowing. Because, you know, when people are in a conflict situation, you know, the perfect example is a place like Iraq, which in 2003 we know descended into conflict because of the invasion. Well, a lot of that was actually designed to cover the fact that they were really there because they were looking for these stargates. They were looking for the advanced technologies that the Sumerians had written about. And so they were there to kind of find out about that.
Create fear, create conflict, go in and do whatever they want to do.
That's the formula, and that really is the way in which international conflict has been playing out for decades now. And so, you know, the work I do now on exopolitics is really just a logical development of the work I began doing as an international peace and conflict resolution scholar.
Well, you were so deep into academia, and I love that about you, that you've been following your passions, and you saw Stephen Greer's work with Disclosure Project, and you shifted gears into along with the story just told, but also then learning about Corey Goode's testimony. I like how you both follow your passion, but then you do your research, because in this realm of where disclosure is just coming out, and people they're not on solid ground. You give that to them because of the research that you do. So, I mean, I really appreciate that about you. It really lends legitimacy to the disclosure movement. So, can you say a little bit more about maybe some of the methodologies you use? And
Sure. Well, I really just continued doing what I've been doing since 1989, when I was working as an academic. Doing field work is very important. So you actually go to into the field and you interview people, and you find out what's going on at first hand. So that was the kind of the methodology I began with, kind of field work, studying the testimonies of people who've experienced different facets of the conflict. You know, when there's human rights abuses, looking at whatever government documents or kind of NGO documents are available, to try and kind of piece together what's really going on.
So you follow the people?
The people has always been, for me, the kind of fundamental way of understanding what's really going on. Because you know, people, they're the eyes on the ground.
Yeah,
you kind of ask them what's going on. If you want to go to any place to understand what's going on, you've got to interview people. There's no other way of doing it. Studying documents, you know, reading books, that's just not going to cut it. You've got to actually ask the people. So when it comes to this world of exopolitics, secret government programs, it's not as though you can do field work in a special access program, you know, knock on the door of, you know, Skunk Works and say, hey, I'm doing research on, you know, alien reproduction vehicles and all of that. You know, they're just going to shoo you away. You got to talk to the people that have been involved in these programs. You've got to spend time with them, understand what they've experienced, what they're going through, and try and glean as much of the truth from their testimony. So for me, when Stephen Greer did his Disclosure Project press conference in May of 2001, that was eye-opening, because you know, he had like a selection of 21 witnesses who had their own unique experiences on these secret programs
in high levels of government.
Exactly, government, military,
DNA
corporation.
research on a ET body that they found.
Yes, that was part of his research as it evolved. So, but to me, this was like just a very logical place to begin. Like, okay, here are people, you know, with professional credentials, you know, working with the US military or with corporations or with NASA, and you know, these people have, you know, impeccable qualifications, and they say they experienced these things, you know, whether it was like secretly building an alien reproduction vehicle, or being involved in crash retrieval programs, you know, scrubbing NASA photos of kind of bases on the moon, whatever it was like, oh, okay, these people, they're telling me this stuff, and based on the experience I'd gotten over the previous, you know, decade or more, I really felt that they were telling the truth, that there wasn't any embellishment.
And that inspired you to dig deeper. And
definitely, yeah, because you know, these were people with professional qualifications, and they had a lot more to lose than to gain by, you know, going public and being prepared to go before Congress and saying, hey, you know, I was working for the FAA, and that, you know, there was a cover-up of this flying saucer sighting, or you know, I was involved in alien reproduction vehicle design, and so people, you know, have a lot to lose when they have professional backgrounds.
Well, you know, we gotta let it all hang out right now, so to speak, because you know, these are the times where we have to get this kind of information out. And speaking of field work, when I first came to Hawaii, was with a Caltech geologist, Dr. Jason Salibi, and we did geologic field work. He actually redefined the plate tectonic theory in Alaska, the Aleutians, and Hawaii, talked about the shield-building volcanoes. He said at any point in geologic time, the whole island could blow, of course, but it'd go pyroclastic. But in less of a time frame, he did say that the whole Puna Shelf, you know, could fall off at any time. That it's something that was unstable, and every couple million years an event like that happens that kind of just wipes out all the islands here. So Dr. Salibi always talked about the Big Island of Hawaii as a microcosm of the whole Earth analog, a mini fractal, so to speak, of the East meets West culture, all the climates. You've got, I think it's, there's only one subtundra region that we don't have here in Hawaii. And so have you seen the Big Island, being here as your home, have you seen Hawaii as a fractal exopolitically?
Yeah, well, yeah, very much. There's so much happening here on the Big Island. You know, there's a secret base underground, Pahakaloa, and that's a critical place in terms of the military keeping it away from Hawaii residents. As a military base, they have a lot of kind of testing there, where they have a lot of army ordnance, and
we hear the bombs going off all the time. And with all the testimony from Corey Goode and William Tompkins, we've learned that these underground bases are protected by military bases, right? So we've always kind of thought that there would be a underground base in Hawaii, but your research has led you to believe that's true.
Yes, definitely, and that there's connections with other places on the island. Of course, there's the Puna region, and you were talking about the hill in a slump. You know how every geological time, whenever that kind of breaks off, in that area of Puna, Lower Puna, that you actually get a tsunami, a big, an estimated size of like 1,000 feet, sweeping over the islands and then slamming into the west coast of the US, you know, as a 100-foot tsunami traveling at like 500 miles an hour. That's geologically, that has happened before.
Right, we've seen it. We have the record even up to Alaska.
Right, and that recently, you know, according to my research, there was a deliberate effort to generate earthquakes in that Puna region to destabilize the hill in a slump, to actually have something like this happen again. And it's not accidental that I think when you look at, you know, the ownership of the Puna geothermal venture, that there's a connection to the Rothschild family.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. And so how would they go about to initiate an earthquake on that scale?
Well, there was the drilling deep into underground, several thousand feet, where they called it enhanced geothermal drilling. And basically it was very similar to fracking. It's the functional equivalent to fracking. The difference with fracking is, you know, you basically, you're pumping a lot of gases, a lot of liquids into the ground to basically destroy certain areas so that you can test for mining or for oil. Whereas with enhanced geothermal drilling, you're pumping liquids in there supposedly to replace the liquids that have been taken out to maintain an equilibrium. But when you're pumping liquids in at high pressure, you're having the same effect of destabilizing the geology. And the studies have shown that geothermal, you know, whether it's fracking or whether it's enhanced geothermal drilling, you're going to have earthquakes. And with these earthquakes, you're going to have an enhanced possibility that you're going to create a vehicle for lava to drain out of a nearby volcano into that area that's been destabilized. And that's exactly what we saw with the Lower Puna region.
Jeez, I mean, we've seen, if you've been following Dutch Sense, who, right? Yeah. You know, we saw in Dutch Sense on YouTube, he goes out and he shows where there's the earthquakes, and he goes there and says, let's look around, and sees, oh, there's some geothermal activity and some potential fracking. And he doesn't say this is why it's happening. He says, interesting that it's right there next to where all these earthquakes are happening in the Midwest.
Yeah.
So we have deep drilling, fracking essentially going on, and what other elements are coming together to maybe cause or bring this about?
Well, one of the things is that Kilauea volcano is connected to the Hawaii hotspot. So that goes directly down to the Earth's mantle. And as far as I know, of all the geothermal ventures that exist around the plate, there's only 2 where there's a geothermal plant that is accessing a hotspot.
The core of magma shooting up onto the Big Island is the biggest in the world.
Right. So it's like you only have 2 places where that's happening. In Hawaii, the Big Island is one. But what's really interesting was someone that I interviewed, and I actually spent a bit of time exploring her testimony. Her name was Aurora Garcia. She lived next to the Puna geothermal venture for 20 years. And she basically described what she found there over those years.
The off-gassing, the terrible...
There was the off-gassing, the incident, but one of the ones that really kind of stood out for me was she said that one day she was out on horseback riding over the grounds because she'd been doing it for years, even before the plant was there, and she heard what sounded like 1,000 bees, or thousands of bees buzzing. And she said she went to the old crater there, the Pu'o, and she went towards it, and she heard this sound really intensifying, and she started to kind of like feel really weird and had to back off. Now, the thing that's very interesting is that in my research, people have described the same thing when describing the Nazi experiments with the Bell. The Bell project.
Bellcraft.
The Bellcraft. When they were building the Nazi Bell, people that were involved in that, workers and so forth, said that it sounded like thousands of bees.
Wow.
The same sound. So it's like that was like that. The Nazi Bell was basically the Nazi attempt to build a kind of space-time weapon.
Right, because the Bell is actually an engine that is what the Bell is, but they call it the Bellcraft because it's the engine that propels an anti-gravitic engine that propels the craft up.
It has a number of applications. It can be used for kind of propulsion, anti-gravity, space-time movement, but also can be used as a bomb. As a weapon, a really powerful weapon.
Because of the energy that it creates.
Exactly. And Joseph Farrell has done the most work on this in terms of torsion-filled weapons, how dangerous they are. So I found it really fascinating that here's a witness to events happening at Puna Geothermal Venture, describing something very similar to what the Nazi Bell experiments were doing, happening there in Puna. And then it kind of made sense, because one of the things about the Nazi Bell experiment was that they said that they needed a really powerful, they needed a direct current, a generator that would be able to generate an enormous amount of direct current, and they built it right there.
Wow. And
so then it gives us another understanding for what the Puna Geothermal Venture was really there. While the ostensible reason is that it's there to supply alternative energy for the Big Island, that's the cover.
Right.
They're supplying an energy source for this weapons program that's being conducted there at the site at Puna Geothermal Venture.
That really explains a lot, because this scientist I mentioned from Caltech, he ran the Jet Propulsion Laboratory there, and he was very smart when it came to the Earth dynamics and how porous, the lava is around here. So we studied Green Lake to see if it was coming back up. That we saw there was tidal variance. We studied and built a raft and went out there and dropped different instruments down to see if the PGV was releasing chemicals back into the groundwater. He was surprised to see that the answer was no. In fact, we also dispelled the urban myth that Jacques Cousteau took a submersible submarine down there and there was no bottom. I actually did that one because I dove down to, I think it was 45 feet and grabbed grass and stuff. But then they used their instruments and determined there actually is a bottom.
I think it's some sort of weapons research, and the fact that Israel is really one of the foremost researchers into sponsoring all kinds of exotic weapons research.
Now, when you say a weapon, do you mean in the sense? What do you can you explain?
I'm thinking something like a torsion field weapon that is somehow riding off or connecting with the energies being generated by the Earth's hotspot over the Hawaiian Islands or under the Hawaiian Islands.
To use that energy as an initial power source to get it going?
Just to kind of like see how this could be used as a weapon.
Okay.
You know, to somehow be able to access the Earth's core through this hotspot using some sort of torsion field technology that they are powering at the surface there. You know, using the plant generating all this electricity that powers this weapons facility. It's generating torsion fields that could be used for all kinds of exotic weapons research, one of which is, well, what happens when you try and direct these torsion fields into the Earth's core? What's going to happen?
Well, that's what I was wondering, is if you mean in terms of creating earthquakes.
That would definitely be one of the applications.
Did you say there's something about the satellites that can also be used to destabilize and create earthquakes?
Well, one of the things that I did in this new book was look at how satellites equipped with maser technologies were used for weather modification, and basically were used in a false flag attack against a military facility in Florida called MacDill Air Force Base, which is the home of Special Operations Command and also the home of Central Command. But Special Operations Command, they're very interesting. That's a very interesting command, because those are the special forces from all the different branches of the US military.
Okay.
And so they're sent off to do all sorts of classified projects, both on planet and off planet. So MacDill Air Force Base is the home for that. And so it was very interesting when I have someone that I've been working with since 2008, and he...
An insider?
Not an insider, someone who was a contactee who had experiences with these human-looking extraterrestrials, and then he began to have people within the covert programs approach him to help them develop some inventions based on the information that these Nordics had given him.
Well, let's keep going, because I want to get into your book topics. And how is the United States Air Force pushing the envelope of disclosure, and how does it also relate to the Big Island here?
Well, the Air Force has been kind of like involved in this from the very beginning. People often cite the Roswell crash as like the example of when the Air Force got involved in all of this. But it even goes further back, goes back to the Los Angeles air raid incident in 1942.
Then you mentioned the Nordics, so they've been involved with the United States Air Force for a while now?
They have, along with other extraterrestrial groups. I mean, the Air Force has been really trying to get as much advanced technology as they could, while weaponizing it wherever they could, and also developing hydrogen bombs, thermonuclear weapons, the strategic bombing fleets that they developed. So that made them kind of like off limits for a lot of more positive human-looking groups.
Okay, right.
But the Air Force worked with other groups that didn't have a real problem with this.
Okay.
So, these were kind of more negative groups that didn't have any issue with the Air Force developing thermonuclear weapons.
I'm sure.
So, that's the way it was up until recently, when the Air Force had a change of heart, and that's why the book is called Shifting Extraterrestrial Alliances, the subtitle. And because essentially what happened was that the Air Force realized that the technologies that they were getting from these kind of more regressive groups were not nearly as advanced as they were told. That they were kind of like really redundant technologies, even though by our standards, by the white world standards that we live in, open source literature, what the Air Force has developed is incredibly advanced. But when you compare it to what the Navy has developed,
the Navy, right?
Because the Navy, from the very beginning, have been working only with human-looking extraterrestrials. They avoided the other groups. And I think that was part of a strategic plan that the Navy came up with, because the Navy do see themselves institutionally as the guarantors of the American Republic.
Right.
That the Navy, more so than anyone else, will basically do their own thing to preserve the American Republic. And the Marine Corps is basically part of the Department of the Navy.
Okay.
And so they've been working with these more human-looking groups for decades now, and built a really powerful space fleet that operates in deep space. And one of my books called the U.S. Navy Secret Space Program details that.
Great. And was it exciting for you to see William Tompkins' testimony to kind of legitimatize all that, since he created a lot of those crafts?
Well, that's right. He was involved in the design of these craft. I mean, he was working with the company, the Douglas Aircraft Company, that was the one that from the very beginning was the United States' most developed aircraft company in terms of being able to handle advanced technologies. Back in the 40s, the Douglas Aircraft Company was the best. Just as today we think, well, Lockheed, Skunk Works is the best when it comes to, really far out classified world. Back in the 40s, it was the Douglas Aircraft Company.
Well, it's understandable the companies keeping their technology, being segregated, but you'd think that the government would all work together, but they're so compartmentalized that now you're saying that the Air Force they had a kind of a different mission. And so tell us more about what you've been learning about the United States Air Force and what they're doing with disclosure.
Right, so the Air Force has basically been developing secretly fleets of anti-gravity vehicles, flying saucer designs, triangle designs, rectangle designs, all using anti-gravity propulsion systems. We've got photos of those craft, and some video as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Of these
exopolitics.org. Check out Dr. Salla's site. So go on.
So the Air Force has developed these kinds of exotic anti-gravity craft since the 70s. The Air Force has always been aware that there are multiple extraterrestrial groups out there. There's at least 60 that have been interacting with our planet. And the Air Force for decades has been working with a few groups that have been most willing to trade technology and help the Air Force in its weapons development program in exchange for basing rights and abducting humans and all of that sort of thing. But when the Air Force realized that they'd been tricked, that the technologies that they had been they'd been helped in developing were really kind of second-rate, redundant compared to what the Navy had done, working for decades with a more positive group of extraterrestrials, the Air Force decided that they were going to work with the same group, align themselves more with that positive extraterrestrial group that the Navy had been working with. And that's what's been happening, and that's why I think the Air Force has been encouraging people to take photographs of some of their secret spacecraft.
Wow, where were they encouraging people to do this? Was there?
Well, I have a source, a witness in Florida who lived next to MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa for years, and he was actually encouraged to take photos of some of the craft.
Wow.
That he was told he'd be out walking and some guys would pull up in a van next to him and say, point up or look up
actually
or something. Point it out, and he'd look up and there's a craft, and so he'd start taking photos and that, and then he'd send them to me and we'd put them out. So,
wow.
And he had some people within the Air Force that were advising him, giving him information. But it was clear that there was a group within the Air Force that wanted the public to to know about this stuff. And then, so as in retaliation, you had the Hurricane Irma. That made a beeline for Tampa, Florida, and led to MacDill closing for the first time in its history.
Incredible.
And all that was retaliation. And it was very interesting, you know, I mean, I'm sure you're aware of how on how the deep state uses symbolism, but the fact is that the Hurricane Irma struck the area, MacDill Air Force Base, on September 11.
Wow.
September 11 of 2017.
Incredible.
And when you look at Irma, the name Irma is named after an old Germanic war goddess.
Oh, jeez.
So it's like, you know, right there, it's like the deep state was like, okay, we are retaliating here.
And so they're using HARP and scalar energy to harness the power of existing weather patterns and actually enhance them through chemtrails and stuff like that. Can you explain how they actually steer a hurricane?
Right. As I understand it, there's been an evolution in how they do this. I mean, HARP heats up the ionosphere, and in addition, they also have maser satellites. That's kind of newer. The newer technology is these maser satellites that can target a particular area and raise the temperature in the upper atmosphere, and that's what's used to steer a hurricane. So if you have a hurricane that's generated typically off the coast of Africa, off the west coast of Africa, and as it starts to head, you know, into the Atlantic, you superheat the upper atmosphere, you know, around the hurricane to steer it wherever you want it to go. So that's how they've been doing that.
Interesting.
And so they were using maser satellites. They were using facilities out of Antarctica to do this. The deep state was doing that, and they steered this hurricane direct to MacDill Air Force Base. And it was retaliation because the Air Force has begun working with these more positive extraterrestrial groups.
What other ways are they bringing disclosure out that you've seen maybe that relates here to Hawaii?
Well, one of the kind of big things was the Hawaii missile alert in January of 2018.
Good thing we didn't even see that one.
It was like for people that were here, you know, getting that message on their phone, you know, incoming ballistic missile, take shelter, and for half an hour, people were just panicking.
We heard people were jumping in their water catchments.
People were doing whatever they think you could do to evade a nuclear attack, and of course, you know, the official story is that it was just a mistake. A guy pressed the wrong button, but according to the research I'd done, and multiple sources confirmed this, it was an actual ballistic missile. It was a nuclear weapon.
Wow.
It was Hawaii was to be the trigger for another world war.
Unbelievable.
And that was a nuclear weapon that was fired. And the big thing was that this was orchestrated by the deep state. They used one of their rogue submarines to launch this ballistic missile off the coast of North Korea to make it appear that the attack had come from North Korea,
to try to create that dynamic,
to create the war, to make North Korea the patsy. But the thing was that the Air Force guys, because they'd been tipped off, they knew what was going on, and we know that because 6 days before the Hawaii missile alert, before that event, QAnon posted on the 8chan forums, and this was on January 7, 2018, 6 days before the Hawaii missile alert. It made several posts saying beware of a DEFCON 1 situation, a false DEFCON 1 situation.
I remember that.
And it's like, so they got the tip off. They knew it was coming. So when it did happen, when it was pulled off, the Air Force guys were ready, and they have all these facilities in space. They got their secret satellite facilities up there, and they've got their rectangle weapons platforms. So they shot it down. They shot the ballistic missile down, and we know that they shot it down just near Maui, off the coast of Maui, because there were a lot of Maui boat captains that saw something explode explode up in the sky, and there were witnesses there that this thing exploded and it crashed, and for the week afterwards, the Coast Guard were all over that place looking for the remains of it all. But the Maui boat captains were kind of like sworn to secrecy. All the witnesses were intimidated into silence. So I tried to do the research to kind of back up these reports, and the information I was getting from my Hawaii kingdom sources was that people had been warned off to stay quiet about this.
Jeez.
They were being threatened.
These are some really amazing times, Dr. Salla, and we have a lot of potential shifts going on with not just exopolitically, but geopolitically as well as geophysically, and we've actually been able to. I look forward, and I want our audience to be able to learn more about what you're talking about with the United States Air Force. There's so much to cover with you. You cover so much incredible information. I want to get onto some other things, but why don't you just let them know where they'll be able to get your book in the future?
Sure. You can go to Amazon.com. You can pre-order now. It'll be available from May 21st. And you can go to Barnes & Noble, or you can just visit my website, xrpolitics.org, if you're interested in an autographed copy.
Great. So you covered some amazing information in your talk about correlating Corey Goode's testimony with the Enochian mysteries. And as we spiral in timelines to the point where you also talked about Atlantis and Antarctica, and how we're at a very similar time right now than those Enochian times. Mm-hmm. And I was given The Keys of Enoch, that book, when I was 15 years old by a guy who was my mom's partner. He said he said there was a UFO landing base near our property. It was just south of Shasta, and he told me he was in touch with a lot of these ET races, and anyway, he gave me that book. It really touched me because it inspired me so much, what was in there. Now, the books you talked about were more of the African Book of Enoch, the Hebrew Book of Enoch, and there was one other one.
The Slavic.
The Slavic. Do you want to share some of the information that why you believe that Corey Goode is on a similar path as Enoch was back in the day?
Right. It's very interesting because when you read the Book of Enoch, it's all about this war between the righteous angels and the fallen angels. And today we would see that as being the war between positive extraterrestrials and negative extraterrestrials, and that humans were like they were being manipulated, or they were used as proxies by both sides.
Right.
And so in the books of Enoch, and there's 3 books of Enoch that today scholars look at. As you mentioned, there's the Ethiopian book of Enoch, there's the Slavic, and then there's the Hebrew book of Enoch. And each one approaches this from a kind of different angle, but essentially Enoch is this figure, a human, an ordinary human, that was chosen to be the mediator between the gods, or between the fallen angels and the negative angels, or the fallen angels and the righteous angels. So Enoch was chosen to be the intermediary and to be a witness to all of this. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at the book of Enoch and how Enoch was given this responsibility and kind of flown to the heavens and mediated between the fallen angels, was asked to bear witness to the events, and also asked to be a scribe, to kind of like get all the history of humanity so that that history could be preserved. And when you look at all of those elements and then you match it up with Corey Goode and what he's been describing in terms of him being a kind of intermediary for the Sphere Being Alliance, mm-hmm. where he was mediating between the Draco reptilians and the Sphere Being Alliance, where he's been taken into the inner earth, where he's been a witness to the history of the planet. You look at all of these things and it's like there's a lot of similarities here. A lot of parallels.
Sure is, and that it was amazing to see how many in the different books as well. Is that something that you just kind of came to you? I mean, I'm curious because that was there's so many correlations. Is that something you had researched before?
Yeah, I had researched the Book of Enoch before, so I was very familiar with it, and what really kind of made me that made the connection was when Corey described how he was asked to be the mediator between the Draco Federation and the Sphere Being Alliance, and the Dracos wanted to cut a deal, saying, well, if we give over, hand over our minions and we'll just leave, we'll hand over. But the Sphere Being Alliance said, no, you're now part of this. You're going to be here for the end times, and you're going to face the truth. And when I read that, I immediately thought about something very similar that was described in the Book of Enoch, where Enoch was asked to be the mediator between the fallen angels and the righteous angels. And I thought, wow, there's a parallel here.
So if we end up having this great solar flash, which all planetary systems go through at one point or another, and every 26,000-year cycle, I guess the sun releases some energy, disconnects from the rest of the sun, is the way Corey put it, and the rest of the suns and gives off this flash. The Draco reptilians, if they're trapped here, so to speak, they're going to be forced to evolve in another way, not through ascension, but through reincarnation, I guess, and choose a lighter path. So if these times are similar, is what you were talking about with the timelines of when Atlantis came to be, when there was the Babylonian system in full power, or the technology was present, where there was similar kinds of competing extraterrestrial races, but also politically. So you see us at the same time about right now, that the Atlantean time happened?
Very much so. And when you look at the Book of Enoch, it describes the period just before the flood, just before this event that ended the Atlantean Empire. And Plato talked about it at length in his dialogues in the Critias and Timaeus.
I remember that. That's amazing. You went back to some of the earliest documents that essentially talked about this time period, and that was Plato and.
Right, yeah, Plato talked about it, and of course described the end days. The book of Enoch is also a historical record of the end days, and there's also this third source that I used in my presentation from John Peniel called the Children of the Law of One, and he described this monastery that existed up until recently in Tibet, that basically had continued unbroken since the fall of Atlantis, that it had been in Tibet since the fall of Atlantis, and it carried all the ancient records of the Law of One and what happened in the end days of Atlantis. So I think we are very much at the same point in our history as Atlantis was just before the cataclysmic events, and they probably went through something similar, like a solar flash event, some sort of catastrophic pole shift events that led to these flooding all over the planet, that led to all the coastal cities being destroyed, and the only things that survived were kind of like areas kind of up at an elevation, and the same thing would happen today if there was a pole shift and you had the oceans of the earth kind of sloshing all over at supersonic speeds. All coastal cities would be wiped out. The only places that would be survived would be areas at an elevation in the interior of countries. So enough of the population would survive to rebuild, but of course it would go through a dark day, because you can imagine losing all of your coastal cities.
Oh yeah, it's a whole reset there. It doesn't matter what how you've prepped out, and but I notice you live at high elevation here in Holualoa. We're 1,500 feet or something like that.
Yeah, we're at 1,000 feet, so we're okay as long as it's not a mile-high tsunami. If it's 100 feet, a couple of hundred feet, we'll be able to ride it out.
What happened to that monastery in in Tibet? Is it still there?
Well, that's really interesting because, of course, people are aware of the Cultural Revolution in China in the 1960s, where they destroyed a lot of all of the temples all over China, including the Buddhist temples in Tibet. So they destroyed a lot of these temples. That was
my friend that went to high school with leads treks to the top of Everest, and he says he's just brought to tears sometimes walking by these destroyed monasteries.
Right. Well, apparently this monastery that had survived from the time of Atlantis survived that. It wasn't destroyed by the Chinese.
Okay.
But at some time I believe it was in the 80s, I don't know the exact date, it was destroyed using satellite technologies. It wasn't the Chinese.
I think I saw a picture that you had in your presentation, and it was just like rubble, right?
Yes, that's right. That it had been destroyed because the deep state did not want this kind of information being revealed to the planet.
It's like burning the books at Alexandria Library. It's crazy to think about how knowledge is power, and so obviously we don't want to go into fear with these end time scenarios, but we have record of this happening before. And being aware within yourself of how we can shift our own consciousness to be ready for this period of great awakening. I mean, there's things we can do physically, right? Like detox our heavy metals. And I'm actually in the process of making a video of really easy, simple ways to detox out our heavy metals, because Corey says when the great solar flash comes, we don't want to be having metals in us. That's not going to feel very good. And what are some things you do yourself or how have you shifted your consciousness with this information? How has this information empowered you rather than put you into fear?
Well, living here in Hawaii, it's a beautiful place to be able to kind of like cleanse yourself. One of the things that I do regularly is get into the water, get into the ocean. I mean, I can spend all morning, 8 hours, reading all this really dark stuff that's going on around the planet, and then I go for a surf or go for a snorkel, and it's just a total cleanse. It's just like you come out and you just feel wiped, and it's just like you got to lie down because it's like your body's just wiped of all of that toxic stuff. It's
true. We were talking about surfing earlier, and I have to say that the Hawaiians, they always said, bring your sickness, bring your illness, because they said bring it to the ocean. And what is illness or dis-ease but a corruption of the mind and the spirit and the emotions? And so when you get in that water, it just all goes away. And that brings up the importance of grounding. Walking barefoot in the earth, it actually it brings the hydrogen into your body, makes your cells flow like wine instead of ketchup, and actually changes your blood. So that can help too. But also, what I've found with myself is the concept of doing our inner work to be lighter in our body, to try to tune in whatever way you can through meditation, getting in the ocean, going for a walk in the forest. They can all help us to carry a lighter load moving forward. So do you believe that when we transform during these times we're going into, do you believe the ascension process is some out of body type of thing, or do you think we actually use these physical bodies and they transform in a certain way so that we can handle more of the challenges that are coming to us?
Well, the way I see it is like the whole solar flash and our solar system entering a region in the galaxy where the frequencies are more intense, is that our bodies will start to vibrate much more powerfully, and that'll give much more power or force to our thoughts. And so if you magnify your thoughts right now, by a factor of 10, what are you going to create? Are you going to create a beautiful paradise for yourself because that's where your thinking is taking you, or you're going to create a hell because you're taken up by fear or anger or all negative emotions. So this is where it all comes down to purification and cleansing ourselves. And the more we cleanse ourselves, the more likely when this does happen that we are going to be able to vibrate and ride the cosmic wave into a reality where our physical bodies are transformed because our thinking is occurring at a different level, or you're going to implode and go through the death and reincarnation process, and you'll end up somewhere else.
When I was about 10 years old, I remember telling my dad after seeing the man on the moon and some of the big things, it all had to do with space and traveling into space, and some of those things that I thought at the time was like humanity's greatest achievement. So I told my dad, I'm going to be a part of something that is even greater than that. And I didn't know what it was until I started realizing that we are in the midst of a planetary awakening. And just like you mentioned, we're actually in uncharted territory in this giant cloud. And when Corey talked about the experiments they did with the secret space program going into this cloud, it literally magnified the thoughts that people, if someone was inherently, peaceful, they became more like that. If they were, kind of negative, they kind of went into a downward spiral. And there's actually a lot of disclosure in some Hollywood movies, scenarios in the sci-fi genre where they go into space and have a similar kind of experience. So it sounds simple, but really purifying, aligning. I mean, these were things taught by the Buddha and all masters throughout time. So there's some power in that of trusting that we will be at the right place at the right time. In the meantime, we can get information like this out. We can enjoy life. Mm-hmm. I keep telling my wife, we got to do more and give more. She said, no, we have to enjoy life more and have more fun. So
that's it.
I appreciate that about her. And, I honor her on Mother's Day today. It's great to have come out and gotten this place so we could have this conversation. And she's out surfing right now and enjoying instead of being our audience, So I think that gives a lot of hope to humanity. And when people read your information you present, just all the research that backs it up, I feel like that really, it really gives us, allows us to trust even more on the path that we're on. And so you've seen some physical changes to the Earth's poles magnetically in your research. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Right. Well, the Earth's magnetic poles are moving much more quickly than anyone had anticipated, and just recently the global authority for mapping the magnetic pole positions that's used for GPS had to accelerate its 5-year plan for readjusting these because the poles are moving so quickly. And the magnetic pole movement is a harbinger for a geophysical pole movement.
Right.
And this is one of the things that a number of people who've been doing this research have described, that when we have a physical pole shift, it's a magnetic pole shift predates it. That's the warning. Something's about to happen, and I think we are probably going to have something like a physical pole shift occur because in Antarctica, especially the western region of Antarctica, the volcanoes are melting the ice sheets much more rapidly than any scientist thought possible.
There's a lot of volcanic activity in Antarctica, right?
They just discovered in 2017, they discovered 91 additional volcanoes. Prior to that, they'd found 40 volcanoes in mainly in West Antarctica.
Wow.
They found another 91 in 2017. These were all buried under the ice, and many of them are active. And they're becoming more active, and they're becoming more active because the Earth's core is being triggered by all these cosmic rays coming into our solar system, and the
all the other planets as well, right?
Right. The heliosphere is much weaker because we're at a solar minimum. Some more cosmic rays come in, and they're hitting the Earth. They're going into the pole, into the south and north pole, and going into the Earth's interior, and they're triggering the core. So the volcanoes are becoming more active, and they're melting the ice sheets, especially in West Antarctica, and that can trigger a pole shift right there. If you have all the West Antarctic ice sheet melting, you'll have a kind of like the way in which the Earth spins. Now all of the ice is going to be on East Antarctica, not West Antarctica. So that's going to affect the way the centrifugal force operates. And this was the critical force, according to Charles Hapgood and Albert Einstein, for what triggers a pole shift. Wow. So I think we are likely to witness a pole shift. You know, I gave an approximate date, 5 to 10 years. That's how long it'll take for the West Antarctic ice sheets to melt if the volcanoes continue to erupt because of this Earth activity.
So it's not cow farts that the ice poles are melting,
Not definitely not cow farting.
Well, I mean, they want to blame it on the cows and they want to blame it on the people, but we've seen that there's some real things happening. Even suspicious observers, they talk about the top-down model, and that our sun actually has an effect on the global weather changing, and it's not just the humans that are doing it. There's the top-down model shows that there's actually the sun's energy is coming in and changing things. We're actually in a solar minimum right now. What happens when we go into a solar maximum? Do you know the timeline for that?
Well, the solar minimum is expected to start probably next year, 2020.
Oh, we just went into the solar minimum.
Well, so we are right in that solar minimum beginning now. And probably 6-7 years we'll have a solar maximum.
Oh, so
right.
Interesting.
Now, what's going to be really interesting with that is, well, the solar maximum is something that, because the Earth's magnetic sphere is weakening, we can expect more kind of like solar flares from the sun to impact us. And so there might be some big ones, but the thing is, well, what's going to trigger a micronova? What's going to trigger a solar flash? We're not talking like in the past there's been like an X5, X6, X7 type flares. What would trigger a solar flash, which would be like X100 plus, which would be just off the charts? It would fry all the electronics on the planet and probably mess up with our biology in some ways. What could trigger that? And it would have to be something like a really major infusion of cosmic energy coming in, and that's likely going to happen not during a solar maximum, but during a solar minimum.
Right, like you were saying, the heliosphere is letting in more of these particles, which there's massive well, they're small, but they're powerful. Neutrinos and different particles come through us all the time, or just passing through us, since we're 99.9% empty space. So it's interesting. I mean, here in Hawaii, I don't know if you've noticed, but the sun seems more intense when you go outside. Is that just me, or has there been any measurements that actually show that the sun is more intense? It seems like it's more white too. Like I seem to remember it being more yellow. Is that just me? Right.
Well, I think because the magnetosphere is weakening, our Earth's shield against the sun and against cosmic rays is weakening. It's at its weakest point in recorded history, and it's continuing to weaken. And so this is, again, what many people speculate is actually a sign that the Earth's magnetic field is about to reverse. And that in the reversal process, you have the collapse of the magnetic field. And as the magnetic field collapses, that means that our protection against the sun disappears. And so, you know, we're going to see the sun go through these shifts. You know, maybe we're going to see, like you're seeing now, you know, the sun's going to appear wider, it's going to appear more intense because our magnetic shield is weakening.
I'm interviewing a guy who's a scalar expert that's actually working with the ohia trees here for rapid ohia death, because he's been able to dismantle any pathogen with his scalar frequencies, and be it virus, and they have studies before and after, but the scalar energy, it's literally sun energy, and that sun frequency, it's like the light works with our DNA in a certain way. It appears that you know, this what they call junk DNA, that our bodies are capable of so much more, is my point. And you've done some work on our body's ability, even at a cellular level, an atomic level, of these mini black holes and like wormholes that we can actually, as the ancients have been able to supposedly do with skills like teleportation and levitation. Are these some things we might be able to look forward to, as rather than go into fear about these Earth changes?
What I find really fascinating with the theories of Nassim Haramein, where he talks about the proton being essentially a black hole, is that theory gives us an explanation for the kind of holographic universe. Because if every atom, if every proton within our bodies is a black hole that's connected through wormholes with other black holes, and is sharing information, you know, through its the surface of these black holes, which is how black holes exchange information, then we have a model for the holographic universe. And not only that, we also have an understanding for how the physical body can literally be like a stargate, like we can actually use our bodies like a portal, and this is one of the abilities that I've kind of like run across from time to time in doing my research. I mean, people are aware of this in terms of the Masters of the Far East, and I'm also aware of it in terms of some contactees who say that they spontaneously began teleporting when they were exposed to the kind of higher frequencies of some extraterrestrial groups.
Interesting.
So this is a natural ability we have to use this physical body as a portal, as a stargate, to travel, you know, through to anywhere.
Right.
But of course, you know, we're not encouraged to do it. In fact, we are discouraged from doing it, and you know, the foods and the water and the atmosphere is polluted in a way so that we are dumbed down not to use our minds in a way that could lead us to discovering how to use our bodies as stargates. But yeah, I think that ability is a natural one, and we have it.
And the programming and just the way our society is set up, I love how you said, you know, our most potent asset is our creativity and our consciousness. And as we learn to develop it, to be able to create our reality in more powerful ways with ourselves, and especially with each other, when two or more are gathered, right? I think that we have a lot to look forward to with that. And you know, Nassim, he was an old friend of mine. We raised our families together here on the Big Island when he lived out here, and I'm blown away how he can speak on an academic level at universities and have debates and prove that the mass of the universe exists within the space between the proton and electron.
Yeah, he explains it, you know, in terms of like the interior of the proton. When you look at, when you fill that up with all these Planck spherical units, then you arrive at the weight of the universe within the proton.
It shows that we are, like you're saying, fractals of like that's how you can actually show scientifically that we are one and the whole universe is within us. And there's a lot of power that, like, in that the vacuum of space. And so where we go with that is the ability to have free energy, anti-gravitics, and to tap into that, which we've been held off from for so long. So I believe that we have a lot to look forward to, and you've definitely helped me to feel lighter in my heart about these coming changes, and to just keep going along and trusting that we are on the right path, to not go into fear, and just keep doing what we can do to contribute to the greater good. And I hope that this helped all of you as well to do the same. And I look forward to getting into some of the other topics with you in another conversation. And it's really great to connect with you, Dr. Salla, and thanks for sharing your presence with us.
Thanks, Sky, for having me, and thank you for listening.
All right. Aloha. Bye for now.
I wanna be your teddy bear, so you can take me everywhere. I wanna see what it's like when you feel so tight, and when it's like when it's getting loose. I wanna be your only friend. I wanna know what's in your head.